Simon, should you make your announcement again, do you think?
Yes, I think that the time is right. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this next session of the conference. To remind you that we are recording the conference so that the video of all the conference sessions can be placed on the Guild's website and will be freely available by the end of this month, if not sooner. And for anybody who wasn't with us earlier on, to remind you that if you want to leave a question inspired by something you hear, if you could put it into the chat function and write the word question in capital letters before your question, it just helps us to identify the questions. There haven't actually been a vast number, but it's still a very useful thing. And also the name of the speaker, if there's a particular person your question is directed to. And with that, I think those are all the technical matters. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much indeed. I was just reaching for my copy of Neal's book, although Neal has told me that it's an edition that has now been superseded. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, there's another one by Latolata.
And I'd love to have in Italian. In Italian, it is in Italian, isn't it?
Both in English and Italian.
Yes. Well, welcome as a speaker. And thanks for the contributions you've been making throughout the day. You may all have noticed that in the photograph of Neal in the biographical essays, he is shown rowing, which I found very fascinating. Is this a hobby of yours, Neal?
When I'm in Venice, yeah, I love to row, yes.
Good. Well, it seems to have become far more common as a hobby these days, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, a lot of people are taking it up, as they should, to get to know Venice.
Yes. So here you are, origin in the United States of America, now living in Cambridge, England, and a very distinguished career as a writer and as a journalist. And I must say, I've read every word of your book, and I often dip into it for particular interviews. And I thought it was very generous of you to offer to lead on the politics of Venice and how to harness them. So over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to share my screen if I can. Is that sharing?
Not yet, no.
Not yet. But so should be start share. Is that sharing?
No.
Well, it's if I go to meeting start share, that should do it, right?
It should, or the other way to do it is to go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen where it says share screen.
Oh my. Okay, so you see there's a little link here. Okay, now I'm sharing.
We're still not seeing anything other than you.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, I can fix that. Right. Slideshow. Okay, here we are.
We can't see a slideshow, Neal. We're still seeing you. So for some reason, you may think you've shared your screen, but it isn't showing up for everybody else. I don't know. Are you using the share screen function within the Zoom frame at the bottom?
At the bottom. Okay, share screen. That's it. That'll do it.
Yeah, try that, and then it should show up your other presentation. And then you click share screen, and you should then take over the screen as has been happening with others, but it's not happening yet.
I'll try one more time. Share, desktop, share, system preferences. Come on. Yeah, okay, I think I've got it now. Still no.
No.
Now.
Yes.
Oh,
Hey,
Yes.
okay.
Well done.
Okay, right. Anyway, thank you for the introduction. And I think I'm going to touch on some of the points that have risen about why there's no agency and the lack of political control in Venice. I begin with a look at Venice's modern political journey. Ever since the 1940s, Venice has stood out for its progressive bent, in contrast to the more conservative surrounding province of Veneto. The left had strength through the presence of artisans, intellectuals, and the Communist Party in Mestre on the terraferma with its workers in the industrial port of Marghera. In 1975, against the trend in Veneto, Venice elected its first socialist mayor, Mario Rigo. And from that time until the election of the current mayor, Luigi Brugnaro, in 2015, the city voted for left-of-center administrations, especially after the laws changed to allow direct rather than party elections of mayors. The first directly elected mayor was Massimo Cacciari in 1993. Cacciari's administration had a critical role in setting Venice on the course it follows today. To understand this course, one needs to look at the thinking of the 1980s and 1990s. With the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, Italy experienced a wholesale change in its political scene, including the collapse of the Christian Democrats and the Communist Party. There's the Berlin Wall. Something else related to the Cold War was at the same time building steam, a new economic ideology that grew in part out of the Western response to the Cold War, something called neoliberalism. In part, a reaction to problems with central planning economies of socialist countries, and in part, a criticism of legacies of Depression-era government economic intervention in the West. This new way of thinking made the market the arbiter, not just of prices, but of wider areas of political authority. In other words, it put profitability as the key to addressing social issues, rather than seeing society as made up of people with rights and duties first. It often casts the environment as a matter of business rather than something vital to all life. It has favored wealth of the few and income inequality at the expense of social values and that holds society together. As I said, this idea is called neoliberalism, and it's a theme song for the new Venice. The idea of neoliberalism is especially attributed to the Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek, and later to the American economist Milton Friedman, both of whom are Nobel Prize winners in their fields. A version of their ideas was championed by Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, and then in Britain by Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. It came to Italy under various guises, including Silvio Berlusconi, and also by the short-lived center-left government of Massimo D'Alema in 1998 to 2000. It was D'Alema who passed a number of key deregulating laws that directly affected Venice. In short, both left and right jumped on the neoliberalist bandwagon. Here's a sort of image of neoliberalism. But the force of neoliberalism has really culminated with the election of populist Luigi Brugnaro, who has taken the idea to new extremes, commercializing Venice in new ways, and as a policy, putting profit above heritage and environment. The neoliberalist ideas were introduced, however, by the philosopher-politician of the left, Cacciari. His policies encouraged the sales of palazzos to foundations and investors. Overall, he made culture a force of change, opening Venice to the world. But the deregulating aspects of his policies, favoring business over residential needs, also contributed to depopulation. His administration was the first to monetize Venice in this way. One of his deputies, Councillor D'Agostino, famously said, and I quote, "Venice is a cultural and historic heritage that must be put on the market. It's not like it's not for sale and transformable." The drive also came from Rome, which passed neoliberalist-inspired laws aimed to stimulate tourism where tourists were scarce, such as more remote towns. Many of these towns benefited, but in Venice and other historic centers like Florence, the loss of regulation upset the balance between residential and commercial rights and tourism. This added to the existing pressure from the popularity of second home buying, cheap flights, the exponential growth of tourism, and later in the 2010s, flat sharing services like Airbnb. This has left Venice in the hands of speculators and flat sharing profiteers. Since the 1990s, palazzi and hotels have traded there like chips in a great financial game, with hundreds of millions trading hands, and the trend only accelerating during the pandemic as owners of small and medium-sized properties came under greater economic pressure. While I doubt Cacciari anticipated the consequences that later, or would have welcomed them, the far-right entrepreneur Brunaro is a dedicated believer in unfettered market freedoms. His rise to power coincided with a moment when Venetians were disillusioned with left-of-center candidates due to corruption and bad administration, and so forth. Perhaps they were also tempted by the promise of neoliberalism, that of letting money decide and hoping it would resolve the problems. Brunaro's policies are openly slanted in favor of business and his own personal gain. It's hard not to accept accusations that he went into politics as a way to pursue his business aims by other means, as he has lost no opportunity to advance his interests in his basketball team stadium in Mestre and touristic properties for himself and his cronies. Brunaro throws up his hands to blame the Italian parliament for depopulation, which is Venice's main problem. But he has, in fact, missed lots of chances to exert control and support residential housing and local economic diversification. The electronic monitoring solutions he has proposed for over-tourism, which will come into effect this summer, are unlikely to make a difference. He's credited with capping the number of hotels in historic Venice, especially on the terraferma. He is also responsible, however, for subverting democracy along with community engagement in Venice. Stories of his unwillingness to listen to the public are legion, and I would submit that his lack of dialogue has contributed to the frequency of conflict, the demonstrations and anger, mostly over his plans for expanded. One recent example is his plan. This is Mr. Brunaro. I've skipped his slide. This is a slide of the recent protests about the commercial use of the arsenale. People in Venice have come to expect a deaf ear and a large portion of poison in the political atmosphere. The history of these sorts of conflicts punctuates many policies of the Brunaro government. Most famously, its attempt to install turnstiles at the entrances to Venice in 2018. This clumsy political move and the furore it sparked when Venetians felt their city was being declared a Disneyland attraction showed what scant regard Brunaro has for public views. But then he surely knows how to appeal to people with money and has been willing to pour investment and attention on Venice's terraferma, that's Mestre, and its voters there, who are now his main constituency. This helped Brunaro win a second 5-year term in 2020, despite signs that his popularity may have been waning, certainly in historic Venice. There he is, he won the election. Brunaro won because the opposition was divided. It put up competing candidates. He was also pulled up by the popularity of Veneto President Luca Zaia, who won many plaudits for his handling of the pandemic. He and his Lega Nord supported Brunaro, but mostly Brunaro benefited from population changes that have transformed politics over the recent decades. Venice and the terraferma, including Mestre, and this is looking from Mestre to the city, and Marghera, the industrial area, were united under one administration in 1926. Until recent decades, Mestre was considered peripheral. The city of Venice was focused on historic Venice. Mestre was considered countryside. At the time of the catastrophic floods in 1966, Venice had a healthy population of about 130,000 people, which was more or less equal to Mestre, but it was losing residents steadily, while Mestre was at the beginning of a population boom. Today, Mestre has 260,000 residents versus Venice's 50,000, and many believe that figure is overstated. This difference is the most salient fact about the political landscape today, one that is shaping historical Venice's future. Today, Brugnaro relies on Mestre to stay in office, while in historic Venice, there is more appreciation of the city's special needs. Mestre is a modern city, worried most about jobs and tourism and industry and its own development. In 2020, Brugnaro lost everywhere in historic island Venice, but with so few residents, the interests of historic Venice's were not reflected in the election results. And in a clear sign of who he sees as his constituency, Brugnaro celebrated his 2020 victory in Mestre, and he was the very first Venetian mayor ever to do that. Many see the Venice-Mestre divide as a structural cause of the neglect of Venice. Since as far back as 1979 and as recently as 2019, referendums have been called on the separation of the administrations of Mestre and Venice. Here's a map of how they would be separated. But every one of those 5 votes ended in the proposition losing. This reflects the belief among many that despite their differences in viewpoint, the economies are so interlinked that what they need is more joined up administration, not less. The legislation sparked by the 1966 floods, the special laws, envisioned such a structure, but it never came to pass. The government at Rome is also in a part of the problem for Venice. While the current government has its strength and while populism is in decline and neoliberalism itself is rather in disrepute globally, rest assured that Venice is not high on the national priority for Rome. The greatest failure has been its inability to update tourism legislation, which other over-touristed cities such as Amsterdam, Barcelona, and even New York have managed to do quite effectively some time ago. The way the government resolved the crisis over cruise ships in the lagoon is another sign of central government neglect of Venice. Tommaso Cacciari, who speaks after me today, is the nephew of Mayor Cacciari, was among the leaders of this anti-cruise ship movement. And for a decade, it seemed that the moneyed tourism and property lobbies in Venice, which are supported by Brugnaro, would simply not budge. But the pressures from these protests came to a head in mid-2021, when just about the time UNESCO was expected to designate Venice an endangered World Heritage Site. The new government of Mario Draghi simply did not want to be associated with that kind of humiliation, placing Venice on the list that includes the Buddhas of Bamiyan in Afghanistan, which were blasted away by the Taliban as pagan icons. Rome decreed that ships would henceforth enter via a circuitous route using the canal used by commercial shipping to get to Port Marghera. So the decree was a mixed victory for Venice. It prevented UNESCO from adding Venice to the endangered list and got cruise ships away from historic Venice, but left the environmental issues completely unresolved. As I expect Tommaso will discuss this, suffice it to say, despite some promises, Venice has pretty much walked away from the matter, leaving Venice to muddle on. So what am I getting at overall? You hear the neoliberalist camp declare that they are just following the market. It's a juggernaut that cannot be stopped. But in fact, depopulation, over-tourism, environmental collapse have been, to a great extent, choices based on misplaced faith in neoliberalist ideas. Other cities have overcome the problems by planning, applying regulations and controls. There is nothing inevitable about what to some appears unstoppable decline. It takes only a stronger democracy and political will to change course. I dare say that it can still happen. I believe Venice could move beyond this quagmire, as I've called it. The people of Venice make their voices heard through many citizens group, as Rosella has explained so well today. And with any luck, you might just find the next mayoral administration is more sympathetic. Certainly the central government is more sympathetic. Gennaro is limited to 2 terms and may even depart early for various reasons. International pressure will continue to play a critical role. Venice needs outside voices, especially now that the population in historic Venice is so small that its voice is waning. So a conference like this is certainly useful. It's also true that Venice is changing irreversibly. Change is part of Venice's history. Venice, the empire, ended and became Venice of the great visionaries who made the Marghera industries, the port and the Lido resorts. And then since the 1960s or so, Venice changed again. It has become Venice monetized for tourism. So each age of Venice has its pluses and minuses. Today's Venice too is a mixed bag. The Venice of today is full of events, conferences, and lively with tourists, even if life for the residents is diminished. The future community of Venetians will certainly be transformed, perhaps becoming more international, more centered around the universities and around people who can work remotely. But if Venice survives its environmental threats, which won't be easy, the community that is vital to its remaining a living city will, with a little bit of enlightened encouragement, I hope, persist and thrive again. The threat of Venice turning into a touristed ghost town, devoid of real inhabitants, is genuine. But I take the view that people who love Venice will give it life. To live in Venice, by definition, you have to love it for its beauty and unique lifestyle. No one else would put up with the acqua alta, the costs of maintaining deteriorating centuries-old housing, and the assorted inconveniences. As long as there continues to be a substantial community that loves, cares for, and lives in Venice, it will survive. And on that note, I conclude and thank you and the Society for its work and for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Neal, very much indeed for such a fluent and understandable account of the political evolution of Venice up to the point that we've reached today. And good that you see some positive factors like the international support, the numerous organizations in Venice that are campaigning, standing up for Venice, the role, the developing role of universities and schools indeed too, and people who can work remotely. What I suggest is I ask now Tommaso to give his talk and that we have any discussion about the politics after the two of you have spoken, as we've been doing up till now. Simon, is Tommaso there?
Yes, I see he's joined us, Tommaso. His screen camera's off at the moment, but I believe can hear us.
Right.
So, yes. Oh, no, he's
not going to join us visually.
No, oh, he's just gone again, unless he's moved up.
No, I'm here.
You're here. Wonderful.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Hello, nice to see you.
Hello, I apologize. I was working, my telephone went down with the battery and I just managed to get in a house and have my telephone attached. Sorry about this, but I was listening all the afternoon.
Oh, good, wonderful. It's not easy to see who's here and who's not here. And we've had a lot of people here during the course of the day. I hope you liked this short essay I wrote about you, Tommaso.
You are too kind.
I don't know about that. But anyway, you commissioned me to do it, and so I was very pleased to do it. But I want to tell everybody else that for me, you represent the sort of person that Ruskin so much cared about and to whom he addressed his letters, which we call Fors Clavigera, because you think with your head, you feel with your heart, and yet you can also work with your hands. And it's an unusual combination, both an intellectual and a craft person. Anyway, it was lovely to sit in the sunshine talking with you 10 days ago, or whatever it was. So are you ready to speak?
Yes.
Follow on from what Neal has been saying.
I was right, you are too kind. And yeah, I apologize even about this morning, because talking about art and craft working, we are now in a very hard work session mounting the Biennale exposition that will start in a couple of weeks. And so these days are very hard work days. So I apologize if this morning I was not able to connect. I would like to thank you, obviously, a lot for inviting us. I say us because I am just a voice of a much wider movement about big ships and the fight that we had in the last 10 years against these big cruise ships crossing our fragile city. I wanted to start very briefly about this struggle that we talking about this struggle that we have been fighting in the last 10 years, because Venice was we say it was being put in a very danger position about these ships, because the fight about against the cruise ships in Venice Lagoon is about our health too, because when we say that these ships are too big for Venice, it means that they are really they are also too big in terms of pollution. Washington University studied the pollution about produced by these ships, and one ship produces makes the pollution of 14,000 cars. And if you think about that, these ships has to keep the engine going 24 hours a day in order to give electricity to all the hundreds and thousands of cabins that there are inside. And these ships used to stop right in the middle of the city. It's easy to imagine the amount of pollution that these ships for years has distributed in the lungs of Venetians, tourists, visitors, children, and people living or passing through our city. These ships also are very dangerous because they cause a big damage to the city, a big damage to the stone city, to the architectural city, because they used to move such an enormous amount of water underneath the surface. We are talking about something like 35,000 cube meters of water being pushed and then sucked back pushed against the city and then sucked back when when the ship passes by. And this has caused a lot of damage to the stone city, to the built city. And these ships are also a danger because they are some kind of machines, and the machines break, even if they are new, even if they are well kept. And as we saw in the last years of ships passing through Venice, we had two accidents. One, an actual accident that the ship crashed against another one just before entering the port of Venice, and could have been a very serious accident, because about 80 meters before the place where the ship MSC Opera crashed, there is a supermarket, and 100 meters before there is a water bus stop. And so that accident could have caused many victims if just happened just a few meters before. And the thing that we said in 10 years of struggles is that these ships are just the biggest contradiction, are the point of an iceberg that is much bigger and is much wider, and that is causing that it's how can I say that it's ruining and it's transforming Venice from a city to a kind of amusement, a very amusement park. We said it in these 10 years. We won a battle against these big ships. Now the ships are not anymore crossing Venice, and we are very happy about this. Of course, we know that the battle is not finished. Of course, we know that these ships, they want to keep these ships in Marghera, so inside Venice Lagoon. We will move there our struggle and our battle. These ships has to stay away from the lagoon, but now the movement we think is strong enough to bring the struggle to the whole city, and we started, and I know you Peter, you even passed in our last assembly, and we are starting to a new struggle for the city as a whole, for keeping the city a city. Because as we said in all these 10 years, big ships are just the bigger contradiction of a model of a tourist mass economy that is destroying Venice as a city. First of all, the housing problem. First of all, there is a very big problem that people has to escape, has to move away from Venice. A city without citizens, Venice without Venetians, and I'm not talking obviously about any ethnical rubbish, and Venetians are everybody who lives the city, and not only who has been born in the city and their parents born in the city and that kind of stuff. But there is a very big problem of housing. Houses, the rent of houses in Venice are at the level of the center of London, of Paris, and people are having much more difficulties to find a house to live for residents. Just an example, when I was much younger and I studied at university here in Venice, outside the real estate companies, there was pieces of paper saying we don't rent to students. Now they say we don't rent because students used to go there in 10 and 12, damage the house and that kind of thing. Now real estate companies don't don't rent the houses to residents, because they gain much more money renting just on tourist markets. Tourist daily rents are throwing away citizens from the houses. And the absurdity of the situation is that in Venice, and I heard that even before some speeches before me talked about this, we have a kind of 2,000 public houses in Venice that are empty, and are keeping them, and public administration, regional and city administration are keeping them closed. And so we could have at least 2,000 houses ready for people to live in Venice, but public administration is keeping them closed, and this is happening since years and years. Of course, we need a new policy about housing. We have to bring people back to live in Venice, and make people who are working or studying in Venice, we must invite them, and we need a policy that aims to keep workers and students here in Venice and transforming them in Venice citizens, in Venetians, in new Venetians. And this, I think, it's the main point that we need, because a city without citizens. It could even being crossed by Grandi Navi. I mean, a city, we want to save a city, not only its monuments, not only its stones, but even the bodies and the people who live. And so this is, I think, the real main problem. And this will solve even another big question of Venice, that it's the economy, the jobs, the works. Venice, if you take away university, if you take away the public administration, there is kind of one single job that people do in Venice, and it's tourism. Restaurants for tourists, bar for tourists, housing for tourists. It's everything. It's just one economy, that it's mass tourism economy. And this killed all the other jobs. We say that what keeps a city is the biodiversity of economies, is the plurality of jobs, of occupations that a territory offers to its citizens. Venice suffered even a lot more of other cities from COVID situation, from lockdowns, from this pandemic, because when tourism fell, when there were no tourists, all the economy system of the city fell down. If Venice, I don't really agree with who said and says that how beautiful was Venice empty, how beautiful we can see the streets all empty. I don't think an empty city is beautiful. I think that an empty city is frightening. It was I went to work during the lockdown, because I could work during lockdown, and seeing my city empty, it was terrifying. I would have loved to see my city full of people, but not full of daily tourists, full of citizens, full of people who live and work here. And if we manage a new housing policy, we could manage this, will bring even different kind of economies, different kind of jobs, different kind of offers that could really change the economic face of the city. That in these years has pushed away everybody who didn't work with tourism, and just kept that kind of mass tourism economy. As consequence of this, for example, we have a big problem with health. You know, hospital services and sanitary services are closing. In Lido, now they are talking to close even San Giustinian in Venice. The health, housing, health, citizenship in some way, and jobs. These are the main points that our struggle is confronting now, that the main issues that we are trying to front, because the main struggle now is after that we won the battle against the big ships, the big cruise ships crossing Venice Lagoon, is that the big battle is to avoid that Venice becomes a big cruise ship, that Venice remains a city and does not become a big amusement park with gates that opens in the morning and closes at 6 o'clock in the evening. This, I think, we have the opportunity now to join all the energies that there really are in the city, and I think that this meeting of today is very representative of the different energies that still are here in this beautiful city, to join together and to really make the big change, really make the big turn and win the most important battle, and is to keep Venice as a city. I think that there was a question, but I don't find it.
Yes, there is a question, which is, what is the justification for keeping public housing closed and unavailable?
Very, very simple, because public housing is something about the coming from the past century, no? And so it's a service that the public made, that the public used to make to popular, to the most poor part of the population, no? And so the balance was red. I mean, they don't make money with public housing. They spend money. Public spends money for public housing, doesn't get money from public housing, because you give a house to somebody that pays, I don't know, 50, even 20, even 100 euros a month, no? So it's a service that the public used to make to the people, to the citizenship. In about the beginning of the 90s, the public institution that run the houses became azienda. First, so it became
Companies.
Sorry?
Companies.
Yeah, not real private companies, but before it was ente autonomo, it was part. Now it's azienda territoriale. It named it's the chief of the institution is by public, is put there by politics, by public, but the structure of the institution is a company. And so their goal is to close the year not with more money than the year before. And so when you are talking about public houses in the historical center, so you're talking about old houses that need a lot of work, and probably inside these houses there are old people. And so these old people have been left in the public houses for a lot of years, and the public houses were not refurnished by a lot of years. When these old people died and the house gives back to the institution, they have to spend a lot of money to refurbish the house, to give it to other people. And that's not more convenient. This institution doesn't have money to make these works, and so it's more convenient it's more convenient to leave the house closed than to make work inside and give it to other people. And so this is they say we don't have money and we cannot spend money, because they cannot go with the balance sheet below the zero. And so houses just are left there. In the mainland, they sell these public houses on the private market. But in Venice, in most part of the historical center of Venice, in the historical city of Venice, they cannot do this because of a national law. And so they have no money for refurbish the houses. They cannot sell them, and they cannot give these houses to other people because they are not a norma. I don't know how to say in English. They don't respect the law. I don't know how to say it in English, a norma. And so
Up to standard.
No,
thank you.
A norma, it's not up to the legal standard.
Exactly. And so they just are left closed, and they're about 2,000, not a few. Thank you for the help of translating, and sorry about my English.
Anybody else?
There are no, oh, hang on, question. In the short term, are you optimistic about seeing una svolta, a shift towards sustainable Venice and against the profit-seeking policies propounded by the mayor? Apart from community groups such as your own, are there significant political figures waiting in the wings?
Of course, I'm optimistic. We have to be optimistic. I mean, I think that every year is worse and will be worse. So I think that we have no many chances to win this battle. I am not quite optimistic about politicians that are waiting in the wings, if I understand what it means, because in the past years, even before Brugnaro, these processes are, even by left-wing politicians, were not much better than now, obviously, but we're not really gestiti. We're not really managed exactly. No, for example, the houses for tourism, you cannot leave just to the market. If I was saying with Peter when we met, no, if I have if you leave that a company that has 60, 100, 200 apartments in Venice to rent them on a touristic mass tourism market, and you don't help people that rent their houses to residents, to citizens, and you just leave it like this, you cannot change these things. I think that I'm optimistic that in Venice there are a lot of energies, a lot of differences, a lot of people involved, because people love so much the city that they live in, and I'm optimistic that from there could begin a change if everybody sticks together and don't divide themselves on things. But if everybody sticks together, and if I think there is a big chance to make the change from politicians that already ran the city before Brugnaro and prepared the way to Brugnaro. I'm less optimistic, if I can be honest.
I'd like to say a couple of things, not unrelated, but in Britain, we have had the experience of towns and villages which were very much dependent on one thing. Usually it was coal, later steel. And even today, after decades, these areas and these towns and villages have not necessarily recovered. Some have, many haven't. So, the world has plenty of experience of the dangers of any kind of monoculture. It just seems to be such a foolish way to go. But the other thing that occurs to me is that there's been the pandemic, okay. We don't know how that's going to develop in the longer term. But we also are on the edge of a terrific energy crisis by the look of it, aren't we, with supplies of gas and oil being very politicized and problematic. So that may cause tourism in general to crash, or at least to become much less possible. And a third thing is, one of the reasons I find the big ships so outrageous is that we know that we're destroying the planet ourselves, and those mega ships consuming fuel in the way they do, causing pollution, as you mentioned, in the way that they do, they are literally the opposite of what we want as a society. So it's brilliant that you've been campaigning and are and will campaign always against them. They are just simply monstrous.
We have another question. There are two questions actually. Luisella, who says it's a silly question, I don't think it is. What do you think the future of the port, also commercial and industrial, in Venice is? With increasing rise of the sea level, the Moise gates will work more and more often. So how will ships ever reach the port? Is that a you know, will it?
No, that's absolutely not a silly question. I think it's a really right point, because if cruise ships are not sustainable for the lagoon because they are too big, they go too deep, but the Mose, that it's such a stupid solution to the sea rising, because it's absolutely, even that, it's absolutely the opposite. Venice lagoon is not a bathtub that you can close and open with a tap. It's a very complex system about water coming from the mainland, coming from the sea, sweet water from the rivers, salt water, sand from the sea. It's such a complex system. If the sea will rise, I say a half of the provisions, Mose will close one day yes and one day no. And so no ship nor commercial, no cruise ship could ever come inside the lagoon. The problem about the commercial port is that gigantismo, how you can say the process that ships are going bigger and bigger and bigger. Obviously, we've seen it on the cruise ships, but it's much bigger on the commercial ships. And Venice port, Venice lagoon, already today cannot host the biggest commercial ships, because there's not enough water, there is not enough deepness in the lagoon to permit the entrance of these of the biggest commercial ships. And so these ships are already going to Ravenna, some of them going to Monfalcone, some of them going to other ports of the North Adriatic that that has more water, how you can say, that are different kind of ports, are not inside the lagoon, but are outside, they are on the sea, and so they can host these big ships. The problem of Northern Adriatic port system is that the different ports of North Adriatic, that it's not far away one of each other, are doing, they are in competition between them. Instead of making a system between them, they are in competition. Everybody's trying to steal the ship from the other port, and that's absolutely insane, because Venice is so unique that can host only particular type of ships. Other ports can host other type of ships, and so it's just making a system with the other ports that you can save, I can say, the commercial port of Venice, bringing inside the lagoon only the ships that are sustainable for the lagoon, as the tourist cruises. Obviously, you can. What we asked since the beginning is an independent study of which kind of ship on big on which size of ship can come inside the lagoon. Obviously, some ships can come in the lagoon. Venice it has a relationship with the sea since it was born. We cannot think about a Venice without a port. We cannot think Venice without water, without ships. But it's the relationship between a portuality and the city that has to be rethinked. We have to rethink which kind of relationship there is between the city and its port. That what has happened in the past 10, 20, 30 years, it's that this relationships has been broken. The port went in one direction and the city went in another direction. We have to, and this is the opposite of Venice. Venice is its port, but its port is Venice. We have to totally rethink the relationship between the city and the port.
Thank you. Anna.
I would just like to refer back to the way the Dutch are planning for their sea level rise, in which no investment plan on any front, private or public, now takes place without taking into account the varying scenarios of sea level rise. And it is obvious that if you start modeling for even intermediate levels of sea level rise, that the port inside the lagoon will become less and less accessible. And therefore, on simply economic grounds, it's not something in which to invest, continuing as a port for very large ships. As Tommaso says, there's competition for the business. The architect of the Mose barriers himself said to me, of course, the commercial port should be transferred to Monfalcone, which is about an hour and a half away from Venice. There has been a suggestion, which seems a good one, is to invest money into turning Marghera instead into the best port for small boats. I mean, by which one means, people's yachts. I mean, much you may not like people's oligarchs' yachts. They need to go somewhere, and you could therefore, make use of facilities there, reclaim the polluted land, and have something that would be compatible with the size of Venice, the lagoon, and keep its sort of maritime tradition going. But the real problem underlying all this is there is no organization doing any planning. It needs joined up planning for Venice on all fronts simultaneously. And it's not lose-lose. There can be good solutions, economic solutions, but at the moment, everything is seen as zero-sum game. If I take this away from you, you're asking for something unreasonable and therefore you can't have it because it's not economically viable. Well, it just needs an authority responsible for planning the long-term survival of Venice in the way that the Dutch do it, which is integrated and flexible.
Thank you. Tommaso, Neal, what do you think of that? Is that right? No planning?
Yeah, well, I think that's the whole thing, that there's been no planning. The government looks at short-term profit, and this undermines the whole process. When you have to look decades and decades ahead in a place like Venice. We've got sea level rise, which will come in 10, 20 years. The port will already be affected. The Mose dams will go up and down so frequently that the commercial shipping will be limited. And cruise shipping is already pretty much a thing of the past, because the solution that they've chosen, putting the cruise ships in Marghera, isn't really very suitable. So yes, there's got to be a long-term view, and people should start asking the government to play its role and not let business have its way.
Tommaso, the last word, or few?
Exactly.
Great.
This is the problem of Venice, that we only look to, how we say here, eat the cake today.
Well, now, first of all, a big thank you to you two for giving us a fascinating hour and a quarter or whatever it's been. Marvelous. Really lovely that you're both taking part in this and much appreciated. Secondly, we have, it seems to me, and here I'm looking at Simon, a choice, because we know how long Professor Bandarin's final talk is meant to be, about 25 minutes, don't we?
Yes.
Would we like a tea break, or shall we just go on and have the final session? What do you think, Simon?
I think we should honour the break, or rather we shouldn't start his talk prematurely, because
Okay.
we announced the time of that session and there might be people who join us specifically for it, and I think they might be very upset if it's finished. So I suggest we take the second break and reconvene at 4:45.
Yes. We're bang on time, which is miraculous.
We are. Yeah.
So we can't lose that one now. It's too late in the afternoon. So everyone, yes, Simon is quite right. We've advertised the time of 4:45 for the final session, so we should keep to it. Hope you'll all come back. A quick cup of tea or whatever, and then the final session, which will be Francesco Bandarin's talk. And then he's had to send it to us today, unfortunately, for various reasons. And then we'll have a certain amount of chat about going forwards, but it won't be a lengthy one. Very good. Short break.